Man, it is going well.
Can you hear
How's
me all right?
I can hear you. I can hear you. How are
Okay.
things?
Doing really good. Really
Yeah?
good. Do you want me to throw on what is it? Something to record this as well on my side?
Yeah, if you can
Just
toss
for
up QuickTime and just start recording, and
okay.
then we'll just get started whenever we
Yeah,
warmed up for it.
sounds great. That's awesome. So how you been?
It's been really good, man. It's been a really great wild ride for the last like 2 months or so with just having a couple short films that we finished and working on the model for Catholic creatives. Like, really want to build in like a for-profit aspect, and I'm kind of a fan of just like going straight for profit, but there's some other people that are not as much into that. So
That's the problem in the creative space. Everybody wants to like do everything for free too.
yeah, yeah. So it's definitely a like working out that model and exactly how we're going to grow and scale has been really fun, actually. It's a I guess like an experiment, if you will, because we're trying to bring in a lot of different voices to counsel on it, but also my brother and I have to execute it, and sometimes those two like don't totally jive. So anyway, it's been good though. It's been really good.
Yeah, it's anytime you're trying to do things by committee,
Hmm.
it's the people who have to execute on it.
Yeah,
You have to like hold it very lightly and allow
that's
everybody else to sort of opine, even though they're not the ones who are actually going to do the work.
yeah. That's why I actually really like. I've started to recognize that I actually have a almost like philosophical resistance to like the nonprofit model, just because the board are the people who technically are in charge of it, but they aren't at all involved in the day to day. And
Yeah.
so they have no like ownership over the risk or over like the intimacy of what's happening. So it separates the decision making from the actual people who are on the ground making the things happen. Have you seen nonprofit models that are like really successful where the board is actually really like helpful and active and good?
um, well, I actually run a board for a nonprofit. So I'm the head of the board, chairman of the board at the Heights School,
Mm,
um, which is where I went to high school, or
mhm,
seventh grade through, and I've got two boys there, um, and it's in a pretty mature state. We're 50 years old almost as a school, and so there's a great confidence from the board's perspective that the people who are executing are running the show. We do not meddle in what they do.
mhm,
Our job is to fuel inject with vision what they're doing on the ground. And so
mhm,
when you have that sort of relationship, the board can be really additive when they stay in their lane.
mhm,
And so I'm constantly very aware that I need to help the board understand what we need to focus on and
mhm,
what is the administrative reality that we have to allow them to do what they do. And we trust them. We put them in place. We trust them, and we're
yeah,
trusting them to make hires. We're trusting them to train people. We're trusting them to take the vision and implement on a daily basis. Yeah. So but it's fascinating. It's not always been that way.
mhm,
Most boards at the beginning of non-for-profit life, the just first 5-10 years are very they're very operations focused. They're
mhm,
very there's they almost by necessity, because oftentimes the board members started the enterprise.
right,
So they start the enterprise and like, okay, so like, what do we do? Where can I show up? Like, no, your
right,
job is actually now you need to be very magnanimous,
mhm,
um, and about how we're approaching this. You have to be like a father of an adult, not of a baby or a teenager.
Right. Yeah.
Relationship.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. That's good. That's good to it's good to know that there are those out there that really are like working really well. So it's hopeful.
Yeah, I think it should. Like the school should benefit from the board and the generative thought. We had a consultant come in and she said, high level boards in non-for-profits and schools in particular focus the majority of their time on generative thought, not on doing things, right? They have good committee side things where they're offering their support. So committees run well and they focus on generative thought versus boards that focus on minutia and don't have committee activism.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I would love to. I've been involved in a lot of boards, and we do a great amount of nonprofit work. So I've just seen I've seen many, and I haven't had many experiences where that relationship is actually really good for the nonprofit. So yeah, that's part of my like anecdotal experience that I'm bringing to the table on it. But anyway,
you can be careful who you choose for the board for sure too.
Yeah.
But if they don't understand the mission, the conversation just like goes off, in a direction you just don't need it to go.
For sure. So did you get a chance to like look through the questions on that podcast primer that Cecilia had sent out?
Yeah, so I looked at them this morning. Just a one shot sort of look through. So I didn't get to really like distill a whole lot of thought on this, but I have a general sense of, the why, that sort of stuff. Some cool questions. There's some similar questions to gosh, what did Tools of the Titans. Have you read that book?
No, I haven't.
Very similar questions to what who put that together. It's this guy who thinks he made up Stoicism.
Tim Ferriss?
Tim Ferriss, yeah. You got it. Like, congratulations, Tim. That's been around for a while.
Yeah.
I discovered classical thought. This is fantastic.
Yeah, man, I love Tim Ferriss. It's definitely a major influence in how I interview.
Yeah.
But
he's got the question of like, what's the thing that you've invested into in the last, I think he asked like in the last year that's most changed the way you think about things. Some of those more particular questions, they're great and they're fun, right? And some of them are primer questions, some of them are deeper. They allow for the attention to kind of go into all sorts of different places. So I like. Clearly, you've put a lot of thought into the questions that you ask people on a regular basis. So they're really cool.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Were there any that stuck out to you as just like, that's funny, or like you just like immediately wanted to answer that?
Let me go to it real quick because. What is your assistant's name? I'm sorry.
It could have been either Catherine Stewart or Cecilia. Check Cecilia. I think she probably was the one that sent it.
Yeah, Sherwood Fellows.
Yeah. I can copy the link and send it over to you.
In terms of topic. No, this is a different one. Hold on. Huh.
Check Catherine.
Okay, Catherine. With a C? Got it.
Okay.
Okay. Yes.
And by the way, a lot of times with this, we just start recording, and then like we'll just start the conversation as you rather organically. Like I'm not going to be like, hey, welcome to the podcast or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll just cut in
You'll
like
do
in
an
terms of
intro.
editing whenever we wherever it makes sense.
Cool. So I had a question. What do you believe that most Catholics might not understand? What about the business, or just okay?
It's totally open ended, and you don't have to. Well, I don't have to ask that if you don't want. Some people ask me not to ask it, but I think
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting one. Yeah, that's one that I think we kind of talked about it initially. I think Catholics oftentimes really struggle with this idea, especially with relation to business, of doing of making money while you're doing beautiful things, or while you're right. So like, if I'm doing something beautiful, maybe I shouldn't charge for it. And you were talking about sort of the bent towards a non-for-profit bent in the creative space, and I think that there's a personality reality there with creatives in general. I feel like I struggle with it a lot, in particular as you start to really get into subjects like selling ideas, right? Like I'm in the ideas business now, which is really creative. I'm no longer transactionally compensated. Right? You take an idea and you actually form it into a transaction. And there's very existential. Like what is my time worth? What is this worth to the company? Should I charge that much? Where's my value proposition? That starts to feel like, well, they should just pay me what you think I'm worth type thing. And that doesn't work in business.
Right.
So I think, I don't know if that's specifically a Catholic thing, but it's certainly a creative issue that I think a lot of folks have.
Yeah, I agree. Cool, man. So I'll keep that in mind as as a direction to run with it. And I definitely want to go into entrepreneurship and creative thinking as applied to making money and profit, because obviously that's something that you've really thought a lot about, and it's part of your core why from like the last time we talked. So, but as we get started, I think it would be cool to just sort of give us some context for like where you are, what you do now, and I guess how you got there. So, who are you, man?
Who am I? So, it's gosh, I don't think I can be separated from being a dad, right? That's I think so often. I had the honor of being interviewed recently for there's a Catholic guy who's trying to he's got a blog here locally, and he's really excited about finding Catholics in the area. And it's like, so what are you about? I'm like, well, like I just dropped my kids off at school, and I enjoy coaching them and that sort of thing. So I think you'll if as you get to know me, you'll hear me talk in paradigms that are basically dad paradigms. So everything that I do through the lens of the vocation of being a father. I would say, if you had to sort of boil me down, like, why do you get out of bed at the hour that you do? Why do you come home at a certain hour? How do you spend your weekends? What drives and motivates your exercise or your business life? It's all framed through this real belief that I'm here on earth to get these little souls that we've been blessed with, Alana and I, to heaven, and that if my business doesn't serve that, it's worthless. If my social life doesn't serve that, if my physical life doesn't serve that, then it's pretty much not worth doing, because that's my calling, right? So it's my vocation. Everything else serves that, and I feel really fortunate that that's the case, right? Because I think oftentimes people and in particular, and I did this early in my career, I had this idea that I'm trying to balance these two vocations, like my professional vocation and my fatherhood vocation. And I realized the fatherhood vocation overlies everything. And to the degree that happens, and happens effectively, and that I keep working at that art and science and frankly the spiritual life that has to go into that, then I'm going to be successful. If I drop the father thing and go, well, I'm just going to focus on these other aspects that I think support the father thing, it's not going to work. So I'd say that's kind of who I am. In a more traditional sense, born and raised in the DC metro area, born at Providence Hospital. My parents met at Catholic U. I ended up going there 20 some years later. Oldest of 9 kids.
Wow.
So, your classic type A, everybody follow me up the hill. If you don't, I'm going to drag you type guy. Right? A little bit like, oh, he's a little intense. Okay. So that's, I got that kind of honestly, my dad was still is a huge influence in my life, as just a father figure, as a man of faith, as a guy who just gets after it on a daily basis and still can't outwork him. He now works for my company, which is awesome. So my dad, it's like the most amazing honor to have the guy who taught you how to work now work for my company, which is really awesome. And his humility is a real example to me, that he can come to his, son who still doesn't know as much as him, and come to him and say, hey, on this particular thing, can you help me out? So really awesome, just tremendous relationship there. And then, my brother works with me, my youngest brother. So there's 4 brothers of the 9. And so he's my youngest brother, Michael. He is everything that I'm not for business, and a tremendous blessing to the business. He's the COO. He's the ops guy. He's the finances. He's the operations. We need technical support. Mike's there. He does an amazing job. I know you work with your brother. So it's awesome to kind of see, look, I'm going to stay in my lane over here, vision casting, big ideas, speaking and motivating, and Mike's on the other side. And we kind of realized that here, just throw out a book recommendation. If I can remember the name, Rocket Fuel. Great book if you want to understand what your strengths are as a leader of a company and where you're not strong, and how to stay in your lane. And so my brother and I read that and we're like, oh my gosh, we actually are made to work together. So, now we've got number 7 on the way, Elena and I.
Oh,
number 7 on the way, which is awesome. Yeah, thank you. So August, it's really cool. And, they're pushing for another girl. We have our youngest right now is a girl. And so we're hoping for another girl. So I've got 4 boys, and, the hope is the 3rd girl, but we'll take, any baby.
We'll take what we can get.
No, as long as the baby will be happy. And the kids are super excited. It's an awesome thing. Our kids just delight. And it's one of this, like, you could give them anything. You want an Xbox? No, like Xbox or baby, hands down all the time.
That's
right?
Amazing.
And that's because we make fun of kids who use Xboxes too much. So actually, we build up babies and we put down Xboxes.
Classic behavioral conditioning.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's kind of family life for us. I coach kids soccer. I got little wrestlers. We in the family, the boys are wrestlers, and my wife homeschools 2 of them. 2 of them are at my alma mater, the Heights in Potomac, Maryland, and that's a delight. And then our 5th, I think I told you about this. Our 5th, John Paul, passed away. So he had a terminal illness called spinal muscular atrophy. It is the most common of the least of the rare diseases, if you will, for children, and it's the leading killer of children under the age of 3. Wow. So we had no idea what this was what was up. And JP's life was an amazing blessing. He was with us for 14 months, just 5 years ago. He passed away. And so, you know, total change. Like without John Paul, I don't have a brokerage. I don't understand talent as well as I do, because when you have a child with special needs, you have to focus on that child. We were basically running a NICU out of our house for over a year. And because of that, I had to be totally dispensable to my business. And that meant that I had to find really talented people to go execute on running the business. And not just running it, but like taking the ball from me and doing everything else. So I transitioned from like quarterback to owner really fast.
So what I don't think any people here know what the business is. So could you tell us a little bit about that? And then I want to ask about that specific moment in your life.
Awesome. Yeah. So I run a real estate company. So I'm sitting at my brokerage here in Bethesda, Maryland. I own a brokerage now called Tower Hill Realty, which is just, gosh, we're 15 months since we opened the doors. Actually, I started it on John Paul's birthday, December 6th, just about a year ago. Also, Feast of St. Nicholas. So St. Nicholas has totally been the man and made sure that financially we're able to, you know, pay our bills during severe traumatic, you know, you have a really sick kid, it costs you a lot of money. And it costs the business a lot. So yeah, Tower Hill's around. But back then, this is going back 6 years ago when he was born. It was me, an executive assistant, and I had just brought on a buddy of mine to be a buyer's agent. So I was running a little group, Pat Kilner, you know, the Pat Kilner group, you know, you run into real estate agents all the time. And I started to bring people on because I was at least smart enough to realize I couldn't do everything on my own. And I'm really bad at paperwork. So I needed somebody to help me with that. And so she was not only great at paperwork, she was great at everything else administratively. So Cheryl actually is just in the next room over. She's still with me all these years later, working for the Kilner Group now. So Kilner Group exists within Tower Hill. And so that time was, you know, I basically was in the hospital with him and I went, all right, you two are running the show. You're meeting the clients. I'm just going to be on the phone and I'm going to coach you. And I coach you through everything. So what I realized really quickly is that God is giving me this opportunity to, one, realize I can't do it on my own. And it's a disservice to my family to think that I'm indispensable to my business at all times. And I think there's a lot of small businesses. It keeps small businesses small to believe that nobody can do it as well as you can. This belief that I'm only going to give people things that aren't worth my talent, right? I'm so talented, I'm going to give other people stuff. Well, what would it look like if you hired people that were more talented than you? Your world blows up. What would it look like if your job was to find bigger opportunity for really talented people? Instead of trying to not hire really talented people, I would have advice from other people in the business and they go, really what you want to hire is people who have failed or who don't have the confidence that you do to do what you do, because otherwise they'll steal your business. And that's a real scarcity mentality. But there's a lot of small business owners who have that. And I think that's, you know, there's a difference between a practice, which is it's me and I'm involved in everything every day, and a business where if I get hit by a bus, this thing still runs. And I realized my job to my family was I needed to be that indispensable to my business so that if something happened to me, because basically you take on the infirmity of the child that is born to you, right? You take on the infirmity of your spouse. You may be in a wheelchair tomorrow. What would it look like if you had to run your business that way? And how would you make sure that you provided for your family? And not only that, to provide for other people's families, better than if you were totally physically able to do everything on your own. So that's kind of the perspective he gave me.
So how did you find out about, what was it called? Like spinal muscular atrophy, SMA. How did you find out someone was wrong?
He was born.
Yeah.
We had no idea. We had no idea what was coming down the tracks. We thought, 4 other super healthy kids, just fine. I mean, everybody's got their defects, but our kids, none of them terminal at the time, right? And then JP's born, and he's having trouble breathing. He was bruised head to toe because these kids, especially as severe as he was so severe. We couldn't find anybody as severe as John Paul, as young as he was in the nation. I mean, and if you've ever known anybody, personally who's sick, or you've been sick before, you can get online and pop into a community of people who have the same illness really quickly. And so we couldn't find anybody in those forums who was even close to where he was. And so we found out about 5 weeks after he was born. They thought, well, maybe it's just a traumatic birth. Maybe there's a spinal cord injury. It's really weird to hope that your kid has a spinal cord injury, because that's more curable than SMA, right? Just to put it in perspective, because nobody at the time had ever survived SMA. Yeah. Right? There's no cure. So that's what it was. And so you go through a mourning process. In your mind as a parent, you think, okay, I'm going to have a child just like the other 4. And then this one's born, and you mourn the loss of the fact that initially, well, he's all bruised up, and he's not exactly, we can't take him home initially. And then you mourn the loss of the reality that he's not going to be able to breathe on his own. And so he had a trach, and he was on a ventilator. He won't be able to eat on his own. He had a G tube, and we fed him through bolus feedings. He's not going to be able to play soccer, right? You go through all these things that you were hoping for your child that you didn't even know you hoped for. You just assumed that this was going to be the case. And then it switches, and then you start to go, what a gift this child is. And the realization that really God gave us an immense, all of your children are gifts, if you're blessed to have children. And each child is a gift, and each child has a calling to change the world, to impact the world massively. And just to fast forward on this, John Paul, I was 33, really kind of cool year to have major suffering in your life, right? Yeah. So 33, JP, during that year of my life, and is around, and I guess what's worth noting about him is he impacted hundreds and hundreds, thousands and thousands of people. We may never be able to count how many people he impacted. We've had people email us and send us letters from Australia who've read his story and who have said, changed my life. Wow. Like, I've converted. This is amazing, right? So if you realize that that's the power of a soul, like God wants to use souls that way. And most of the time we just do a really good job of getting in the way of his plans. And JP couldn't do anything on his own. And God was able to use that vessel of clay in an absolutely beautiful way. And so that's the question that I constantly ask myself now is, all right, so Lord, if I'm going to get in the way all the time, I need to ask you regularly, do I have the right vehicle for my talents? Right? You've given me certain talents. Some of them, some of these talents you can use for great good. So which ones do you want me to put at your disposal? And do I have the right vehicle right now? And in business, I think the question to ask is my business the right vehicle for my talents to impact more souls? And if that becomes your paradigm, then I think you have a tremendously fulfilling business. And in a capitalist structure, which we have here, it's also monetizable, right? And as a dad, I have an obligation to monetize my talents. And what I've realized is that those talents have to involve other people. Mm-hmm. There's certain things that I've got talents that I could monetize, but it wouldn't involve souls, or maybe enough souls. And so we got to kind of put those aside and work on the ones that I think God's calling me to.
Could you tell me about like one of the first moments where you started to transition from grief to like gratitude in your perspective in your life? Maybe it was a conversation with your wife or a moment in prayer.
Yeah, I think it's a constant battle, right? Like God gives us the cross to be grateful for it. Right? Like I think the image that I have, maybe a couple images of just our Lord, on Calvary, embracing the cross, thanking his Father for the opportunity to save the world, and at the same time, he clearly there's nothing to like about it on a human level.
Right.
And I think that's what real leadership is. Christ is the perfect leader, and so he embraces perfect suffering, and he embraces perfect joy in that suffering.
Right. And when you're grieving, though, like obviously that it takes grace to even get to the point of being able to embrace that cross. Like I remember in great times of suffering for myself, like I went through a breakup in 2011 with the girl that I thought that I was going to marry, and for me it was such a it was just such like personal brokenness and experience of like all the plans that I had and the future life that I had been dreaming of kind of like being taken, and it took like a certain amount of just like showing up in my anger with God to get to the point where I could like release that and accept this sort of all right, this cross, this thing, this brokenness is going to be the thing that like out of which resurrection and beauty and all these other gifts are going to be born. And I can't see that right now, but like I'm going to embrace this and like and love it and make that decision to be grateful for it. Like where were some of the moments where you kind of did that?
Yeah, I think it's the right question. What are some of the moments? Because we're not angelic beings. We don't make a perfect act of the will and then, okay, we're good. Right. So, or we see perfect, like you can see with clarity that this is going to be all right.
Yeah.
but you can't make your will get there. Right. Fast enough. So that's why mourning is a process. And actually, I think we're deprived of real mourning in the first world. So, I had to wait all this time to actually see somebody pass away who I loved, right? You in a lot of countries, death is all around. So there's this grappling with death and mourning that is just very human. And here we go, death and mourning, like you can't handle that. We're going to put this person over to the side, out of the melee of real life, quote in quotation marks. So I mean, I don't know, maybe not obviously. The Mass was fundamental, and I go to daily Mass and daily Mass, and just unifying my suffering to Christ's suffering, and just saying, and that's a really existential idea, right? But when you have great suffering, it's unifiable. You can put it on the pattern. You can say, Lord, take this. I can't handle this cross. And I think the idea that transitioned for me was one, this is Christ's cross that I get to be a part of. It's not my cross that he's allowing me to carry on my own. Two, that if he's asking me to carry this cross, he's giving me super abundant grace to take care of it. And so like we had grace. The best description I can give you is like, it's like grace at this level that we were given. If you keep saying yes to the cross, God gives you grace that you can't even imagine. It blows your mind. It's like spiritual drugs. I haven't done any like psychedelic things, right? But it's because it gives you like energy and power for the fight that you cannot possibly dream of.
Mm.
That is, and you see this with like look at St. Paul, right? Where'd he get all that?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a choleric, whatever, like nobody does that without massive grace.
Mm.
And to be counted to say like, all right, I'm going to give you this, right? I'm going to have you step off of the sidelines of life and into the game, and it's going to hurt, and I'm going to give you everything you need for it. And realizing it was actually during John Paul's life that it was like people kind of come up to him and go, how are you doing this? You go, it's not me, it's God. Like I just show up, I work hard, and I trust that he is taking care of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I trust that he's going to take care of my son, and I will bleed myself for the mission that he has in mind. And so his mission became much more important than mine. And when his mission becomes more important than yours, then the game is so much more fun, and it's so much more gratifying. And so when I realized we were part of his mission to change the world through my son, then clearly his vision of the court is much better than mine. His vision of the playing field is much better than mine. So I'm just going to work at this corner of it as dad to this son. So I think that idea pervaded, but that happened through masses, through conversations with my wife. We're blessed with tremendous priests in our life who came and just spent time with us. Great spiritual direction. Got to get the confession. It's what you got to use. You got to use all the means of grace to just put on the armor, right? And we have all these military images in the church of the church militant, right? Like, why? Because when you're dealing with crazy stuff like this, with real turmoil, you have to put on the armor of Christ. And it's not like it actually, you need it. You need it so that you can function in society, not only function in society, but lay waste to the things that our Lord is saying, go get that, go after that goal. And that goal is done through the sacrifice of staying up late with your son. That goal is through changing the diaper. That goal is made possible through putting your spouse first. All these little things that other people just see. And so I think the other thing that it made me realize is my family life, and God's going to change the world through great families. And he wants my family to be great. And he wants all Christian families to be great, right? So, and through that vehicle, he'll change the world. So we were told in the hospital, well, you should probably just stop feeding him now, because it's going to be way too hard for your family. And 86% of the families that lose a child and have to suffer through what you're signing up for, they end in divorce. Okay, so thanks for the statistic. We're not going to be a statistic. Mm-hmm. And we're going to really, no, we have the means to fight for him. We discerned that it was an appropriate use of those means to use what is extraordinary means to keep him alive during most of his life, to fight the battle. It's that's kind of, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a process, and it's a constant balancing act. And I think still, I use the same paradigms now in business and in, my role as father to the other children as well. And as, and his husband.
Man, there's just so much beauty in that, and so many questions that I want to ask about it. It sounds like there was, even as a part of the decision of embracing the cross, you were also deciding in a very concrete way to keep him alive and to stay in the suffering, when you could have taken an easier way out. And you let that paradigm of leaning into the suffering be the thing that that ended up being the central priority of your life. And that ended up bearing fruit in your business and in your fatherhood and in your life. I just think it's such a beautiful witness of the lay vocation of fatherhood, of living a mysticism that's the center from which for-profit businesses can come from, but also like,
Yeah.
like really, really amazing families. And when you say it's families that are going to, change the world, it's the redemption of the family unit that's going to do that. I cannot agree more. I've been reading this book and I talk about it on the podcast like more than any other book. It's called Family Fortunes, and uh, it's a book about uh, basically how families can stay together through multiple generations and pass down wealth. And it's got this opening that's just amazing, where it talks about like families actually are the oldest institutions, not countries, and that there's families that are in existence right now that have lasted longer and stayed together as an institution, as a family institution, longer than the United States of America. And that it blew my mind, because it just shifted like all of my thinking from like building an organization is like this one thing, and then building a family is this like other thing, that they're actually like both the same. And
Organizations serve the family. If they don't do that, they're worthless.
yeah,
I think we have to, as Catholics, we have to really understand that. If the organization you're building does not serve the family, or does not serve, like, where do we get the poor? How do we take care of the poor? We take care of the poor through the vehicle of the family. Where do vocations come from? They come from families, right? Where are we going to get more priests? Families.
yeah.
Where are we going to get more great schools? Families who start them. Who say this is what we're going to do. Where we're going to get great art, it's going to be through moms who introduce their kids to great art and great philosophy. And then you're going to have these great things. So, you touched on a point, and I just want to throw this out there as well. I think the lie that we have to, I think especially as dads, but I think just societally, we have to get past, is that you can actually avoid the cross. You can avoid suffering. Like, you can try. Good luck. Here another stat that so the doctors are throwing out these stats. Great, by the way, awesome doctors. We had amazing doctors, but so many of them have been trained in this idea that that if I can't fix it, then it's not worth fighting for. It's very, very dangerous, right? It's really a sin of pride, just manipulated, and it's taught, right? And the lie that the objective of life is to avoid suffering is actually not Christian. And I think we go into marriage with this romanticized idea that that's what marriage is going to be about. Like, life's going to be better. No, actually, it may be humanly far more difficult. In fact, if it's not eventually, you may not be in the game. You may not be in the game in a, like, I think of sports all the time. Contact sports, you can stand on the sidelines and enjoy the game a lot, but if you're in there on the football field and rugby field, getting slide tackled or on the mat, you're going to make contact, and our Lord wants you there. And so how many times a day do you make contact? How many times a day what you're doing making contact with the world in a way that can spread the joy of the gospel, share the joy that you have with others. And
it sounds like for you, contact is like suffering, like that, bearing your cross, being in the game. Like, if you're going to bear joy and bear the Christian message, bear Christ to the world, like, contact is going to happen where you're experiencing suffering.
Yeah, there's friction, right? Like, there's business paradigms, no pressure, no diamonds type idea, right? Like, you can't get good stuff without putting together the system to actually have friction. And but relationships happen because of intimacy. Intimacy happens because of friction, because of a vulnerability of human beings to connect with each other. And that business is a great vehicle for that. Life is a great vehicle for that, but business in particular within life should be a great vehicle for that, for human intimacy, for fighting for people's human dignity in their work, for giving them, how often do you run into somebody and you go, well, how was your day? Or, how's work? And they're like, it's okay. Just same old stuff. I've been doing the same old thing. Well, in some ways they've been robbed of their dignity. In some ways they're responsible for that as well. Right. Like, you have options, but, I think we get in this mentality that like, I guess, the sort of the Eeyore mentality. So, and you're going to be able to suffer. You're going to have opportunities to suffer in different ways throughout your life. I think in many ways, Elena and I were sort of stretched to a point where like we now have a capacity for tough things that we didn't have before. And so, okay, so now you're there, the muscles are there. How are you going to use them on a human level?
Yeah. So going back to my thing about family and fatherhood and like creative fatherhood, there's an entrepreneurship that it sounds like, you had been building up these skills for building a business that got some gasoline poured on him through suffering and through grace that then in that moment were applied to your family. And I'm wondering what rituals, what practices, what like things do you do that other families don't do that led to you being able to stay together in your marriage? And obviously the natural vehicles for grace, like going to mass and things like that. But what are the things that you do that other people don't because of that?
It's a great question. Well, I think it's the simple things that compounded over time, right? And this is another business principle, but the right things compounded over time lead to exponential results. So like family dinner is sacred, and we sit down as family every night for dinner. We actually this year we started not allowing the kids to actually do sports on Sundays, which is a huge sacrifice, especially in our area. Travel sports, our kids are really competitive. I don't know where they got that from, but so it's like, but it's a sacrifice for me because I'm like, no, we need to go win. Like, we need to go beat that kid. Like this would be great, But it is. So it's these. My wife is amazing at sort of building the family culture within the home. She is totally the CEO of the house, and is very purposeful about a lot of these practices around the home. So those are two examples. I think we have a ritual of every Saturday morning, I take one of the kids out one-on-one for breakfast. Because again, it's that human intimacy. So we wake up a little bit earlier. They have to wake up earlier, go to an early mass, and then go to one of their choice of a diner. Just so that you're really, building that friendship, that relationship, and that openness to the conversation with dad. And Elena does the same thing with the kids in a different way. And again, those things compound over time. We're very purposeful about how we educate our kids. And I think, the outside world kind of goes, well, that's a little extreme, but like, we've had them in different school systems. Elena pulled the younger two, who are school aged, last year and decided to homeschool and just took the bull by the horns, and they're flourishing, both of them. And they're both very different kids. And, and that's not going to be, we kind of know they're probably not going to be homeschooled all the way through, but for right now, just this purposeful disposition of what does this soul need right now in order to go from here to here over the next 3 months, 12 months, whatever it is. And so we do, once a year at least, we'll sit down and just have a conversation. Elena and I, usually on vacation, we just, get a babysitter and go out and talk through each one of the kids and ask, okay, what does this one need this year? How can we be purposeful about this, about Joey's growth spiritually, emotionally, physically, how can we be good coaches to him? How can we, love him into the right virtues, right? I think also, it's on a human level, your job is to help instill the virtues in your kids. And then that, without the virtues, you can't pile on grace. So, you know, if you have a kid that lacks humility, you know, when they're still 18, they won't take direction well, they won't find good mentors. You know, so you have an issue. So that's another ritual of, you know, on an annual basis. We started vacationing sort of in a more isolated place. So we would actually have like a more contemplative vacation. We did the beach thing. It was like not contemplative at all. And we'd feel more stressed after it. And so, you know, the kids bring books. We're also like totally not plugged in. So like our kids don't even ask to watch TV.
Wow. How did you do that?
It's just like, we have a TV right in the middle of our family room too. It's like, you have freedom to turn the thing on. Good luck with that though. Like our kids read voraciously. Some more than others. Some we go, your reading habits need to be pulled back in because you're reading too much, right? And our kids are like free range, you know, they go out in the backyard, they build forts, you know. I'm raising kids, not grass in the backyard, so it's muddy. It's kind of crazy. It's hard to look at sometimes, you know. I go out, I'm like, oh, I'm in real estate, so like I like pretty houses. My backyard would not sell very well right now. So, you know, those types of ideas.
So let me move from that to the business. Obviously, you've built a business that is very family business oriented, right? Like you are working with your dad and with your brother, and they're in key roles. And it sounds like the way that you've built your business, it's serving your family both in that, in terms of facilitating relationships between you guys and deepening them, but also what are some other ways that you've merged rather than balanced your two your relationship with your business and with your fatherhood? How are you like the father of your business?
Ooh. Well, I think, you know, if I have this sort of this maybe it's a graphic in my mind. If fatherhood is about instilling the virtues, then business should be that as well. Right? So most people, and I think societally, there's a lot of people who don't have great father figures in their life. And so the business, I can train and teach and coach people within the business, which is basically what I'm doing. Most of my day is in training agents and teams, and now we've been asked to train outside of real estate as well, which is really cool. So if that, you can train, you know, things that are important for business, you know, how to look at your finances, how to do all this stuff. But what you're really training are the virtues through those vehicles, right? Just like when you're teaching your kid how to do math, you're also teaching the virtue of order. And if you're thinking about that very specifically, as you're doing that, you're thinking about them from a, you know, you're thinking about their soul, right? Aristotle talks about the greatest thing you could do for your friends is be concerned for their souls, and he focuses on the virtues, right? Well, that's what we're doing in business. And if you're doing that as sort of the first domino to souls, right? Our job is to make sure people are, you know, have the virtue of humility, courage, fortitude, magnanimity, right? Self-control, self-mastery, if you will. If people can come to my companies and derive those things, they will feel tremendously invested into, even if they can't articulate why they feel invested into. And that gives people great dignity, and it also allows them to become leaders. And I also have a firm belief that there are no great saints who didn't acquire virtue. I think that, you know, it's one of the tests, right, of sainthood, and that virtue is fundamental to leadership. You cannot separate the two. So if the world is about forming leaders in that paradigm, then you change the world, because you can't be a saint without being a leader. If you follow that logic, right? And leadership does not mean having great charism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, leadership does not mean, you know, standing up and getting people all fired up about things. That's
Yeah.
that's a personality trait, maybe. Or maybe that's a learned skill, but that's not what leadership necessarily is.
Yeah. So Sherwood Fellows were much more at the beginning of the process of growth, where you guys are at. But one of the things that we've in this beginning stage that we've been really focusing on and taking our own counsel to heart, we hired another outside agency to brand us and to help us walk through our core beliefs and our core values. And it was a big thing to cough up for like a little startup, you know,
Yeah.
a big expense. But what it showed me was in a way that was very concrete, like, here are the hills for you to die on. Like, all of the hills for you to die on are right here. And if you die on these hills and you show the people that you're working with that you're willing to do that, then you are going to grow as an organization, in terms of like health, in terms of your clientele. And it's one of the most convicting things I've ever experienced. Like, it made it very clear where I was giving myself slack or allowing myself to violate my own principles.
Mm-hmm.
And in giving me that self-awareness, like it was just this huge rocket fuel injection of virtue and personal growth and holiness for me, like that I now had to be willing to say no to business that didn't fit my core values, and willing to deal with the consequences of that. So sacrifice, like the cross, everything that you're talking about with willingness to embrace that, like, it has pushed me to experience and be willing to embrace suffering for the sake of my values and for the things that I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure that in your fatherhood, both for your business and with your kids, like, you've had to incarnate for them what it looks like to sacrifice for the things that you believe. Like, what have been some moments where you've had to do that and show them like real risk, real sacrifice for your beliefs?
Wow, it's a great question. So to my children, in, you know, my natural children, right? Is what you're talking about. Yeah.
And your business, either both. Let's do one for each.
Yeah. So, gosh, I mean, I think, I think kids see it in the natural. You want to give your kids example of this in the natural way, right? So, I think as a dad, the focus has to be on your bride, right? Because if they don't understand how you sacrifice for your bride, they won't understand Christ's sacrifice for the church. So, so with my wife Elena, I mean, you know, frankly, the opportunities are there all the time, right? Like, she's you know, 17 weeks pregnant, tired, and those are the, you know, hey, why don't you let me hold the baby? Why don't you let me change that diaper? Why don't you let me, you know, run out to the store and pick up that prescription, or whatever it is, right? It's those things just done with naturalness. It's really little things. I don't think, I think if you think about the big things, like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run up this hill for Elena, and, you know, those chances don't present themselves nearly as much as the little things on a daily basis to sacrifice yourself. And I think that's why people trust leaders, is they show up day in and day out and do that. Like, I think my kids actually think that I like waking up at 4:15 in the morning, right? Right, like, because they're little, right? And like, when they get to wake up early with me, it's kind of a cool thing, right? You know, like, not so cool for the 12-year-old now, but like the little ones. And so I think they're beginning to see that my sort of daily habits and routines are there for my wife and my family, and that, you know, it'd be easier to sleep in, but there's there's too much there. God has called me to too much for me to sleep another hour.
Yeah.
So I think there's those things. I think on the business level, I think it's the same. People have to know that you'll bleed for them, that you will go down first, and you'll continually do that day in, day out, again in little things. So somebody has a need, and it's a legitimate need, and you can drop what you're doing and take care of them. I'm not talking about being reactionary. I'm talking about when you show up being really lights out at counseling people and taking care of them and that sort of thing. Just being a leader who's available to people. And also,
so what's like one of the ways that you've had to do that in the last couple of months for an employee or somebody in your business?
Yeah. So, gosh, last couple of months, there's there's a guy on our team. He's actually become a good friend of mine. He was a past client and joined us. And he's one of the part owners of the brokerage now, because he's become that huge of a player for us. And John has 10 kids, and he wanted to go down to Florida and coach his oldest two for their high school baseball team. But when he leaves, it's all hands on deck, because he does a lot, and he's great. He's a great example for so many people here in the office. So just allowing him, like, I internally, my reaction was, seriously, you have to do this? This is so damn inconvenient, right? Like, on a human level, you're like, you just took a vacation, like, in the summer. What are you doing, right? Yeah. And I think that's, it's my intensity, and so just to go, hey, that's awesome. Go spend the time, like, to see that what he wants to do is spend very specific quality time with his boys. They give him, and to not make it an issue of, hey, I'm giving you freedom. Like, no, there's no tit for tat, hey, you're going to have to do this when you get back, sort of thing. That's one. And I think just being aware of people's family lives and facilitating, like, I'm really fortunate to have built a culture where I know when people show up to work, they are working hard. And so I never have a problem when people have family things that they need help with. And to support them specifically in those family needs is a great joy. And while it's inconveniencing, other people and you, I think also leaders can help other people see that what a great thing it is that he's doing this, and encourage that. It actually, it lends itself to such a great culture, to be able to do that for a business.
Yeah. A culture of activated and healthy employees that are all members of healthy families, I'm sure is going to beat a lay everything down and make all the sacrifices, even your families, for the business cause. Like, I just could imagine if those two businesses went up against each other, the one with the healthy families would win, like, every single time,
Oh yeah. I mean, you see, I mean, I see it all the time with people, in the real estate world, and frankly, in a lot of industries. There is a direct correlation between people's middle and long-term efficacy at what they do and the stability of their family lives. Just tremendous. Absolutely. And it's undeniable. And you can tell if you become, if you're astute at all, who's going through turmoil on a family level. And, what a great example John's family life is to so many who, it's not like we hire all Johns right here.
Right.
And so we have lots of other people who are watching, and they're watching to see, is what he, the lie is what John's doing with his family life and being generous, and having these children, he and Mary Lou, the lie is that that's insane, or that I couldn't do that, or they must have superhuman powers, all these other things. It's all, I mean, they're fantastic people. But the lie is that I couldn't, I couldn't possibly be that generous. And you want to allow him to show up as a well-adjusted, fantastic leader who also, and in many ways, is that because of his fatherhood.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I know we're coming up on time here, and I don't want to take up too much more. My last question is, we brought you on the podcast because in the Catholic creatives community, one of the things that we really believe is that there isn't like this box of creative that is a certain type of personality or a kid with the right kind of horn-rimmed circle glasses and skinny jeans that designs things. That creativity is actually at the core of like what it means to be human, and that creating something is a problem solving, thinking outside of the box. That's a universal human thing that we need to stimulate in the church, and is across every single industry. So real estate, fatherhood, design, it's a core first principle that all of us need and all of us use. But specifically for the people that are listening to this podcast who might be working more in the creative industry, in quotations, the people who are not in the business of real estate or finance or economics, what advice would you have for them as it pertains to growing businesses and being able to live the lay vocation as creatives? What advice do you have?
Yeah, so I think, oops, this just came out. I think ask yourself if you have the right vehicle for your talents. If you're asking yourself that question, I think to also pigeonhole yourself as, oh, I'm a creative, therefore I don't do these other things. That could easily be a cop-out. And I think, it's the same lie, families tell themselves, well, we're this way, therefore we couldn't possibly be generous in this way, right? You're actually called to be generous in your vocation, and your vocation has to affect souls. And so, do you have the right vehicle, and are you being as generous as possible in your knowledge that you've acquired in order to gain the skill sets that you need in order to deploy your talents to the world, right? So there's usually a gap in business between, and in particular, with people who are very dependent on themselves for what they produce, right? And which is most people. Most workers are workers who produce a product and they sell it. And there's the gap between where you want to go and where you want to be, where you are and where you want to be ultimately is a question of skill set. So what skill set do I need? What knowledge do I need to acquire? What habits, which are the basis of virtue, do I need to acquire in order to fuel inject this talent that I have, right? And that in order to put it into the world. And then what will amaze you is you add God to that, you add grace to that, and a willingness to submit your talents to him. And then it goes crazy. It gets set on fire. So I think for businesses who may be listening to this, I'll maybe just throw this out there. I think most businesses, if you think your business is about transactions, you are going to be commoditized very quickly. With the disruptive forces of, in all industries right now, your job is to be a creative. Your job is to innovate, which is, and the basis of innovation is creation, is being creative. And it's also very godly. It's also very like God created, right? And he made us in his image and likeness. I think you have to be convinced that my job is not just to show up and put out fires as a leader, right? My job is to innovate and be creative. And you actually have to put aside time to be creative, to push the ball forward.
But how do you do that when you're like running a business and there's so many fires and I'm just, the reason why I react so strongly is that I know this so deeply, but as soon as I get back in, I took like this amazing creative retreat during January, and then was like, I'm gonna just take more time. I'm gonna dwell apart and like have the vision, and then I like get sucked into the slipstream of problems. And how do you like cultivate a life that allows you to have that separation?
Well, we've come full circle. You have to sacrifice in order to get it.
Yeah.
Right. You have to be willing to do what other people are not willing to do to get it, to have that time. Right. And if time, time is a gift. And if we're not willing to use that time for godly activities, right, and this creative activity can be beautiful and should be sectioned out. But for me, I wake up early. My routine is 4:15, and from 4:15 to 6 o'clock, I am doing creative work. Right? I'm working on the strategy for the business. I'm working on the blog post. I'm working on the next podcast. I'm working on a solution for somebody's family, dynamic, so that they can accelerate their professional growth. I'm in a place where I'm not distracted. The computer's not on, or it doesn't have any internet connectivity. The phone is on do not disturb on the other side of the room, and you got to lock down that time because it's so easy to be so distracted. If I wake up and I check my email, that time is destroyed. Mm-hmm. So you have to put in it's a question, going back to the virtues, question of self-mastery to be contemplative. Mm. It's the same. How do you have time for prayer? Same way. You actually have to put your life has to be about sectioning off time for that, right? For God to speak to you and you to speak to Him and to build a relationship. Otherwise, it doesn't happen.
Routine look like? You wake up at 4:15 and just start writing, or do you you go have coffee, you take a shower, you work out, and then you get down?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. 4:15, nobody else is awake, so nobody else is bothering me. Unless, this thing can bother you. The phone can bother you big time. So with all of its, so my phone basically stays on do not disturb all the time. So only a few people can get through to me, during the day. Cause there's no fire, by the way, that needs to be taken care of now, right? Especially when you have a kid with special needs on a ventilator, nothing is that important. Yeah. Right. So I learned that, through some real testing. But I wake up and I go downstairs, big glass of water, 30 to 50 push-ups, espresso, start writing.
Wow.
So I'm writing within 10 minutes of waking up. But the real key is the night before. I actually have I have a planner an old school planner, right? So I actually fill this out. It sits on my desk. But so I take what's in my phone on my calendar and I put it into the planner on an hourly, actually half-hour basis. So I know exactly what's going to happen, and I know what my session in the morning is going to be about. So when I go to bed, last minute prayers before bed, I go to bed. I actually have a place for an examination of conscience at the bottom of this. And so I do an examination of conscience and then write down, here's what I'm doing tomorrow. And I actually have a column for the people that I offer that up for on the side of it. So I know who I'm working for, because again, it's about souls, right? So I'm offering my work that way. And then I can get after it. But then so when I wake up, I don't have to ask myself, what am I waking up for at 4:15 in the morning? It's not a creative process to become creative.
Yeah.
It's a regimented process so that you can get into creativity routinely every day, 5 days a week. Right. So that's what it has to look like. Otherwise, there's a lot of people who rely on my vision, on what I'm producing. So
that night before so it sounds like you have to take time the night before as well. How do you do that?
It's 5 minutes.
Okay.
It's a routine. We could do another one on this, but but I'm happy to keep talking on it. This is one of my favorite things, right? Like I have a lot of responsibilities in my life. I run, I've got 3 different businesses now, I get the coaching company, I got the brokerage, I've got the Kilner group. and I've got a lot of people who rely on me, and I'm available. I'm very available to all of them, plus family life. And so, but I have time each night that's designated for Elena and I to catch up. I have time designated, we have that family dinner, time to just hang with the kids, whether it's, sports and that sort of thing. And so after 6 o'clock, I'm dad, like full time. And that allows me, and then I'm asleep by, between 9:15 and 10 o'clock. So I know personally that I can get 6.5 to 7 hours a day of sleep. If I work out at least once, then I'm good. So then in the morning at 6 o'clock, I work out. And right after that, morning prayer. And then shower up, get the kids to school, mass before I hit the office. And then the whirlwind hits. But I basically won my day before 8 o'clock in the morning.
I love that. That is such a great way to end, man. Thank you so much for.
Oh, my pleasure. This is awesome. It's really humbling that that you would ask me to be on it. Really, Anthony.
No, it's been like such a treasure of. There's so many moments when I've just wanted to fist pump because of like how amazing of a statement you just made. It's such a treasure trove, and it's something that, like, what I love is just how intentional you are about everything, but also like being able to really have to see inside, to see like, oh yeah, this guy's success comes from like a deep discipline to the contemplative life and to like the vocation of a father. Like, there's so few examples of that in the world, and seeing it is like amazing. So,
well, yeah. I'm totally honored. By the way, you had sent me some questions earlier, and I was hoping you would ask this one.
Oh no.
Recommended book, my favorite recommended book, if you don't mind me throwing this one out.
Let's do it.
Over the last 18 months, almost definitely Cal Newport's book called Deep Work.
Yeah.
Phenomenal book. And actually it really, I'm reading it for a fourth time now.
Wow.
Because when it comes to that idea of being creative in the midst of the whirlwind of life, whatever your whirlwind is, he makes a tremendous case and offers some great advice there. So I really like his stuff. So Good They Can't Ignore You is another one of his books. Really, really excellent as well.
Recommend that everybody listening to this buy that book, and we'll all read it together.
Cool.
And make a post about it. So yeah, thanks so much, Patrick, for coming on.
Awesome, Anthony. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. A real honor. So anytime.
All right, man. Well, have a good rest of your week, and I'll look forward to seeing how your fatherhood bears more fruit as you roll. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, pray for me.
So, yeah. Okay, will do.